My name is Elaine. I'm 28 years old, and 3 days ago, I unlocked the front door to a world I never thought would belong to me. My Uncle William, the person who raised me when no one else did, left me his estate, property, business shares, and millions in assets. I was still standing in his glass-walled living room, overwhelmed, when the last people I expected appeared. My parents, the same ones who walked out on me over a decade ago. What they wanted would become painfully clear at the will reading. Before we dive into this wild story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you have ever had to deal with toxic family members, and subscribe to join our storytelling community. When attorney Harold Thompson slid the final envelope across the polished desk, my hands trembled before I even touched it. I thought I already understood what it contained: formalities that follow loss, words on paper that could never replace the absence of a voice. But as I unfolded the pages and read the terms, the weight of it struck me so deeply that the air itself felt heavier. My Uncle William had left me everything, not a token gesture or a share divided among many, but his entire estate, his house, his business shares, and millions in liquid assets. The papers also explained that he had arranged protective trusts and clauses, anticipating disputes. He had thought of everything, even challenges I hadn't yet imagined. I was his sole beneficiary. And when I looked up from the document, I didn't expect anyone else to be at that table until I saw them. Later, when I first stepped into the house that was now mine, the shock only deepened. The windows opened onto an endless city, lights streaming like a river far below. The furniture was sleek, the air inside calm, almost staged. It should have felt like arrival, like safety. Instead, the room hummed with a quiet so sharp it reminded me who wasn't there. The emptiness pressed harder than the wealth surrounding me. My uncle, the anchor that kept me from drifting, was gone. I dropped onto the sofa and let my head fall into my hands. Grief and disbelief mixed together until it felt like I couldn't separate one from the other. On paper, the inheritance promised stability. In reality, it reminded me that the very person who had believed most in me was no longer here to see me step forward. Wealth, as strange as it sounded, carried little comfort in that moment. The room was beautiful, but it echoed with a void that left me wondering if I'd ever grow into the role he had trusted me to fill. People imagine inheritances as gifts without strings, but nothing felt simple about it. That first night, wandering through the rooms, I could sense the precautions he had put in place, as if they were invisible guards stationed in each corner, watching over decisions I had not yet made. His foresight should have eased me, but instead, it left me on edge. I couldn't ignore the question burning quietly in the back of my mind. Who would try to reach for what had never belonged to them? That unease returned to one memory, one absence that had formed so much of who I became. I thought of my parents, the ones who had chosen distance long before this. I hadn't let myself imagine their return for years. But sitting in that vast living room, I recognized a deeper dread than I wanted to admit. My uncle had known this too. He had known they might try to circle back once he was gone. So I stayed awake that night, a single lamp dim behind me, staring out at the skyline until dawn. Pride flickered there, and gratitude too, but underneath it was fear. My life had changed in an instant. I knew the inheritance was a beginning, just not one free of cost. And as the sky lightened beyond the window, I realized something even harder to face. This was not the first time my life had shifted overnight. I'd lived through a different emptiness before, long before his will was ever read. An absence that began the day I learned the people who should have stayed didn't. I was 13, the morning I understood their absence was permanent. The house felt different in a way that went beyond quiet. No shower running, no clatter of dishes, no faint hum of my mother's voice while she brewed coffee. At first, I assumed they'd left early, maybe errands or work. But as I moved through the rooms, a hollow feeling gathered in my chest. Drawers hung open, half the clothes gone. Closet hangers swayed as if they had been yanked free in the dark. On the kitchen counter, I found a single sheet of paper in my mother's hurried handwriting. Just one line to explain everything. They couldn't go on, and my Uncle William would take care of me. That was it. No apology. No goodbye. just an instruction to carry on as if love could be reassigned with a sentence. The note didn't stop me from trying. I called their phones again and again, letting every ring drag my heart thinner until the electronic voice told me what I already knew. They weren't answering. I still checked the mailbox, stared at the door in the evenings, told myself each creak in the hallway might be them coming back. But the void stayed, and with each passing day, it thickened until it felt like part of the walls. Routines became my shield. I set alarms, went to school, microwaved noodles, did laundry in cautious cycles. I kept the porch light on at night, less to keep the dark away than to signal to them that I was still waiting. Over time, even that ritual lost its meaning. One morning, as my hand flipped the switch, I realized I no longer believed they might see it. The action was just a reflex, a tether to people who had already chosen distance over me. It was only weeks later, after the authorities stepped in, that stability appeared in a very different form. Social services traced my Uncle William and contacted him. By the next day, he stood at the doorway, formal and determined, ready to become my guardian. He would later formally adopt me at 16. Unlike the note left behind, there was no softness in his presence, only steadiness. He was stern, precise, the kind of person who believed structure could replace affection. But he didn't vanish. He filled the fridge, kept the bills paid, insisted on order where chaos had settled. His care was never warm, but it was consistent. And at 13, consistency was everything. The absence of my parents still gnawed at me. I scanned strangers' faces in public, wondering if I'd glimpse theirs among the crowd. Birthdays sharpened the longing. Each year, I felt the weight of waiting for a call or a card that never arrived. My uncle handled those milestones with his usual practicality. He arranged dinners, sometimes gifts, always punctual, but never sentimental. Part of me resented his presence, as if allowing his steadiness meant confessing that my parents weren't coming back. His reliability shaped the ground beneath my feet. He handled broken locks, school meetings, the subtle details of daily life that kept me functioning. His gestures didn't erase the wound, but they anchored me enough to begin healing. It was the contrast that hurt most, the sharp difference between those who left and the relative who had no reason to help, but did anyway. That years-long emptiness carved me into someone cautious, hesitant to trust words, listening instead for actions. Even now, the scars of that abandonment show through. They surface in how I measure people's promises, in how quickly I retract when affection feels temporary. It hardened me in some ways, made me independent, sharper to reality. But beneath that armor remained the same question I carried at 13. Why wasn't I worth staying for? That void became part of me, shaping my strength and my doubt in equal measure. And so, when I stood years later, newly responsible for an estate I had not expected to inherit, the quiet of that loss lingered. It framed the edges of every thought, every decision. The house, the fortune, the future. They were all more complicated because of it. I had built my life on steadiness wrestled from abandonment, which is why, when the sudden knock echoed through the walls of my new home, cutting through the fragile calm, every part of me braced. I hadn't even had time to absorb the new life I'd stepped into when my parents appeared again. Unlike their sudden return at the will reading, when they had walked into Harold Thompson's office like ghosts from the past, this was later, an uninvited visit to the mansion my uncle had left me. Opening the door, I saw them there, both faces eerily familiar, but made unfamiliar by time. They had aged, little details giving them away more than anything else. My father's hair was silvering, and his smile felt stiff, like he had practiced it before arriving. My mother's makeup was layered thick, trying to hide years that couldn't be covered. She tilted her head the same way she used to, but now it looked studied, part of an act. Everything about their appearance carried the weight of preparation, as if they had rehearsed how to greet me. "Look at you," my mother said, as if a decade could be swept away in a flattering remark. Her voice glided over the years of absence, carrying the same coaxing lilt she used to employ whenever she wanted to smooth a situation in her favor. My father echoed her sentiments, quick to agree and quick to step closer, one foot already attempting to claim space that didn't belong to him. The shift came quickly. My father glanced around, complimenting the space, while noting how overwhelming a property like this must be for one person. My mother added that wealth could be intimidating, confusing even, that surely I would need guidance. Then came the line so carefully worded, it almost sounded harmless. We can help you manage everything. You don't have to do this on your own. It landed heavy. I knew exactly what that meant. They weren't offering support. They were making a claim. The moment stripped away any illusion that they were here to rebuild a relationship. That first request, thinly disguised as kindness, revealed their true aim. Inside, anger surged, but it tangled with something far more complicated. A part of me still ached for them, for the parents I used to imagine returning on my birthdays. What if they had really changed? But the tone of their voices, the way their eyes lingered on the house rather than me, answered the question I didn't want to acknowledge. As they spoke, distance grew between us, not just physical space. The mansion seemed to hold me apart from them, a reminder of the independence I had built while they were nowhere to be found. They stepped forward like they still held some natural right to guide me, but they had let that go years ago. The words they used now weren't family words. They were strategies, calculations. Their visit left my chest heavy and my thoughts spiraling. It forced me to confront not only their motives, but also the lingering cracks in me, the ones that still longed for affection even when I knew it wasn't real. That tension, the fight between hope and dread, haunted me long after they left. This was only the beginning, that they wouldn't stop at polite conversations in my foyer. The confrontation played out in a boardroom, not a home. The air was heavy, and tension stretched across the long wooden table. My attorney, Mr. Thompson, sat calmly at my side, exactly as he had during the will reading. Across from us were my parents, dressed with precision, as though presentation might carry the same force as truth. They began with what they thought was their strongest ground. My father leaned in, voice edged with authority. "We're her parents," he said, each word clipped. "By law, we're responsible for her. She doesn't know how to handle this kind of wealth. She needs us to protect it until she's ready." My mother chimed in, her tone saccharine, speaking of guidance, of repairing lost years, of stepping back in to shield me from mistakes. Mr. Thompson waited, letting their words pile on without reaction. Then he adjusted his glasses, gathered a folder, and began to set documents on the table, one by one. His tone remained calm, almost courteous, but with each sentence the ground moved beneath their claims. The first document was a copy of my adoption papers. Elaine was formally adopted by her uncle when she was 16, he said, tapping his finger on the signature line. At that point, parental rights were legally severed. You no longer had claim to her custody or her estate. That adoption remains binding. My parents froze, the exact date glaring up at them in ink they couldn't dispute. But there was more. The next packet contained years-old correspondence preserved by my uncle. They weren't letters asking how I was doing. They were emails filled with requests for money, thinly veiled excuses about debts, obligations, promises they never planned to repay. Mr. Thompson flipped to one record in particular, a $15,000 transfer connected to a recorded effort to revisit custody, quickly abandoned when further funds were denied. The most decisive reveal was still waiting. Mr. Thompson paused before sliding out the final sheet. "There is also this clause," he said. "Your late brother, William, wrote a provision anticipating external challenges. In the event anyone attempted to contest or interfere with Elaine's inheritance, the estate would bypass her entirely and transfer to a charitable foundation dedicated to abandoned children." The room went dead quiet. My parents' color drained. They had come expecting possibility, maybe negotiation. Instead, the risk was total. By pressing further, they wouldn't undermine me. They would erase their chances altogether and lose everything to strangers by law's design. The revelation landed differently for me. My uncle had shaped not only my future, but also the defenses that guarded it. As though he knew this day would come, he had built protections around me that spoke louder than my parents' sudden vows of care. As my parents skimmed those pages, their composure collapsed. My father snapped, insisting it was unfair, that they still had rights. My mother's eyes darted over every line, searching for a loophole that wasn't there. They raised their voices, but the facts left no space for argument. By the close of that meeting, there was nothing left for them to argue. They left with faces tight, speaking no words of affection, not even pretending anymore. The meeting had ended on paper, but the story outside those walls wasn't finished. People willing to use family as a tool don't step away quietly. Exposure only changes their tactics. A few days later, I agreed to meet them at a cafe, choosing public space in case things turned tense. The moment they walked in, I could see the change. The practiced smiles were gone. What replaced them was stripped down and sharp. Plain need, no longer hidden behind charm. My father spoke first, not bothering with preamble. "We need help," he said flatly. Then came the brutal honesty. Debts that stretched farther than I had imagined. Unpaid credit cards, a looming foreclosure, and personal loans that had multiplied. Their list grew longer until he finally reduced it to a single request. They needed me to cover almost $100,000, about $70,000 for the house about to slip from their hands, and the rest for her treatments and outstanding bills. This wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an explanation. It was a balance sheet. At one point, my father leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You owe us," he said. "After all, if it weren't for us, you wouldn't even be here." The words landed with cold clarity. After years of waiting to hear them acknowledge the damage of their absence, all I got was a reminder that, to them, my worth began and ended with what I could provide. My mother tried to soften the request with promises I once longed for. She said this could be a new beginning, that we could rebuild if I just helped them get back on their feet. The 13-year-old who had stood in an empty kitchen, clutching a note, would have done anything to believe her. But sitting there as an adult, her promises rang hollow. Their timing gave them away. When I told them no, I braced for guilt, for heat in my chest, or anger twisting my stomach. But what came instead was calm. I wasn't rejecting them out of cruelty. I was protecting myself. Saying no wasn't just about refusing to pay their debts. It was about refusing to let their absence shape me any longer. They didn't argue. They just turned and left, the door closing softer than I expected. That was our real goodbye. Walking away from that cafe, leaving their lists and promises behind, I didn't feel like I had lost something. I felt like I had finally recovered it. The quiet that followed wasn't loneliness. It was freedom. Family isn't proven by what people say after years of emptiness. It's shown by who chooses to stay when life is hardest. Real family isn't decided by bloodlines. It was my uncle's housekeeper who made sure meals kept appearing, my attorney Harold who stood by me in every legal battle, and the staff who carried on his business with loyalty. They stayed, and that stayed with me. To honor my uncle, I engraved the word guardian on his headstone and used the inheritance to create the William Hughes Foundation for Abandoned Children, a legacy rooted in the care he gave me. You don't owe past betrayals your forgiveness, only the boundaries that keep you safe. Real family isn't decided by bloodlines. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to our channel for more real-life experiences. Thank you for watching.